Welcome, dear friends, to Cardiac Radio, who is joining forces here in this wonderful international spiritist event. It's the second world meeting of the Friends of Chico Xavier and the works that he left. Does that mean that those who are not here are not his friends? No. That means that you and I and everyone can be his friends. But who is he? In this program, we're going to get to know more of him. If you're asking, is this a new cult around the personality? No. Chico Xavier never wanted any cult around himself. But as much as we contemplate nature elsewhere, when we study the life of a humanitarian, of a spiritist, of someone like Chico Xavier, we are studying the divine works in action. And we are also getting to know of our own potential. So we welcome you to join us in this roundtable conversation. It's not a discussion, it's actually a conversation. We have here with us our dear friend Nora Ramirez, who is in the United States. She lives in Texas, and she has also been doing wonderful works at Cardiac Radio. She's joining us today to share something that she also has learned about Chico Xavier. And we have here with us Peter Hayes. He was once at Cardiac Radio, still connected to us. You can listen to the programs in our platforms. And he's here from New Jersey. He's the president of a Spiritist Center in New Jersey, the Love and Light Spiritist Center. And besides many other things, and a wonderful wife who is a writer, Betty Rosie, he is here with us also to share the much that Chico Xavier has impacted on his life, because that's the theme of the roundtable conversation, the impact of Chico Xavier in our lives. So think about you and the impact of Chico in your life. And also we have here with us John La Rosa, our friend from the Spiritist Society of Virginia and Cardiac Radio. He has been doing so many works. He has recorded so many books that are from Kardec to Chico Xavier. And you have heard of him and from him at Cardiac Radio so many times. And he's also to share the impact of Chico Xavier, not only his life, but the lives of many of us. So we're going to begin sharing a few slides just to inspire us a bit, okay? Before I pass the word and we start talking a little more. I have here, okay. Let me see if this is the PowerPoint that I need. Yeah. When we last visited Chico Xavier's city, Peter Leopoldo, we've taken some pictures and want to show it to you. It's so tangible. He was born on April 2nd, 1910. And this year, 2022, we're celebrating, actually are celebrating 20 years of his discarnation. And we Spiritists celebrate because his discarnation is like a graduation. He really graduated from a life that is really modeling to us. But he was born in a tiny town named Peter Leopoldo in the state of Minas Gerais in Brazil, a place that is a must to be visited. It's a few miles from the capital of the state of Minas Gerais, Belo Horizonte. And this is one of the places where he worked, a farm. And no wonder the beautiful landscape of the state of Minas Gerais is called Minas Gerais. And it's so beautiful because the city of Peter Leopoldo that is in the state of Minas Gerais has this landscape, which is truly amazing, truly beautiful. When we were there visiting with our daughter, we met the president of one of the Spiritist centers that Chico Xavier founded. And we were visiting the replica of his first house when he was born in Pedro Leopoldo. So it's important for us to know that Chico was of a very humble background. Then later, after working in some other places, he ended up working as a public servant in the model farm. And he worked there until retirement. And this is one of the places where he worked in the very up windows, the top windows, the second floor, the left skinny window is where Chico Xavier used to have his office. To go to his office, you had to pass by his boss office. So people wouldn't find him that very easily. And this is John Harley, one of the main biographers, historians that wrote and have been writing about Chico Xavier. He met him when he was quite young, and he was showing to us one of the farms, Bell. And this was year 2019. Now imagine back at Chico Xavier's time, it's even more modest than it is. So the family that embraced Chico Xavier, that was administrating the farm, the Jovianos family, they had their house inside of the farm. And there, the psychography of some books came along, especially the book Paul and Stephen. And now it's a cultural space about Chico Xavier. So this is the garden that you see nowadays. If you go up in this cultural space, which used to be the house of the farm, and that's one part of the farm. This that used to be a house is now a cultural space. That table is the table where they sat with Joviano's family and had several meetings and several messages from the beyond that are being published almost every year by Vinha de Luz Publisher through the efforts of Geraldo Lemos Neto. And this is the very transportation that he used at the time when he used to be in Pedro Leopoldo. He didn't have a driver's license. He didn't drive any car, and he was transporting himself from home to work in this manner that you're seeing here. This was in the 50s when he was still living there. And that's the very typewriter that Virginia is using there, was used by Chico Xavier and can be seen and visited there. There at the left corner, you can see a little frog, which is like a mini sculpture of a frog that actually accompanied Chico Xavier during the whole time when he was psychographing Paul and Stephen in that very room. When he finished the writing, the frog disappeared. And to date, people wonder what the frog is all about, which is a curiosity for us. This is the second Spiritist center that he founded in his city, the Centro Espírita Meimei, where many disobsession meetings happened. And it became also a mini museum, very small, several books, several places, and it has like a mini museum when you see the pictures of, for example, the people, the couple who led Chico Xavier into Spiritism. Another typewriting machine that he used, and then how small it was back when he started. Everything was so simple. That's why we say when you talk about Chico, you're talking about simplicity. You see the picture when he was participating on the construction of the Spiritist Center, even giving guidelines about how to do it. Some people doubt that Chico was that determined and firm, but he was. He couldn't be any different. He wouldn't have accomplished what he did were he not very determined, though very sweet and kind. And there you're going to find several first editions of many books that he brought to life through his mediumistic abilities, and pictures of his charitable works, and the memorial that still lives in the main city of Minas Gerais, the capital of Belo Horizonte, where we can find the whole literature, the more than 400 books that Chico Xavier brought to life. In Brazil alone today, he's considered, if he were the author of the book, he would have been considered the most prolific writer. Though he was not the author, he always said, the spirits wrote the book, not him. He gave all the copyright to organizations, to charitable organizations in Brazil. And to date, these books are being translated and told by friends like this friend of his who lives in Rio de Janeiro and was telling about even his artwork, making bookmarks, postcards to send to his friends. There's so much for us to talk about Chico Xavier, and this is just a mini teaser for us. There's much for him to teach us, right, Nora? And of all things in his life, just as a person like us, what would you like to share that made it a highlight in your heart?
Oh my gosh, those pictures were beautiful. And just to stay in that vibration, something super beautiful of Chico was his relationship with his mom. It was so sweet. There's in a book, it's still not translated, but it would be translated into like Amazing Cases of Chico by Ramiro Gama. And there's a lot of little excerpts and pieces of his life. And Chico's mom actually passed away when he was very young. So he ends up going to live with his godmother, who believed in her ignorance, right, that he had the devil inside of him. So she would actually fork him, right, and physically abuse him. So it says that Chico would go outside under a tree and that he remembered that his mom had taught him to pray and to say the Lord's Prayer. So this one time he's saying the Lord's Prayer, when he opens his eyes, there is his mom. We can imagine what a beautiful reunion, and being a child, the connection. And so of course he's like, why is this all happening to me? Please help me. And Chico's mom tells him, son, you have to pray. You have to be patient. And everything that you're enduring now has a purpose. It's just making you stronger. Imagine telling like an 8 or 9-year-old all of this information. Well, it goes to go that after 2 years, the mom promised him an angel, and it was a stepmom who him truly, truly loved. But what was beautiful is like there's this other, it was like an interview when he was like 85 years old on YouTube. It was gorgeous. And at the end of the interview, he talked about his mom, and he says, even though of my age, I still feel like a child with my mom. And he said that he would sing with his mom in those times that he was able to meet before she took off, that they would learn a song. And I was wondering if it was okay if I shared the words with it. It was so beautiful. And he sings it, but this is the rough translation. It says, I live oh so happy to sing. In peace and in joy, it is my walking. I don't have any problems nor afflictions, for I have Jesus in my heart. The earth that we love is our school to study and work, endless blessings in difficult hours of exams and tests. I'm sure Jesus is there for me. Let's move on despite the thorns. We hear up closely a serene voice say, let no one turn back from our ways. It is the divine Christ calling for us. And that's a beautiful, beautiful way to see Chico from a baby to an adult, still connected to his mom in that beautiful song.
That's amazing. It's fascinating. Thank you, Nora. And as we study more about him, right, Peter, there's so much to share about the person of Chico. What made the top highlight for you of him as a
There's one that I keep thinking about a lot, especially in the last 2+ years, which was he started a Spirita Center in 1931. And a lot of the people who began the Spirita Center with him were elderly, and many of them passed away. And before long, he was pretty much alone. And so he would be doing study groups alone. And he started to get rather discouraged, thinking, why am I doing this? And then Emmanuel appears. And to make a long story short, Emmanuel allows Chico to see the company that he has. And it turns out there are many, many spirits around him who are taking in everything that he's studying. And these are spirits that are essentially preparing for their next incarnation. So they're learning a great deal. And I thought that was very inspirational because, you know, when we engage in doing studies, working at a center, sometimes we have some people with us, sometimes not too many. And the pandemic has certainly affected attendance in general at a lot of centers. And yet it makes one think about how we are able to have an impact that we don't even realize we're having an impact on. So if we are studying and we're trying to interpret anything from a spiritist book, a passage of some sort, maybe we say something that is being listened to from a friend on the other side, and it makes a big difference. Does it matter? Well, it's not for us to worry about. But at the same time, Chico was reminded that everything he did had a purpose. And this, of course, was before he started really catching and receiving a lot of attention. Later on, there wasn't much doubt. But what about the very beginning? So I thought it was very inspirational that even if we feel like nobody's paying attention, we should still be doing the work and being as truthful to ourselves as we possibly can be.
Thank you, Peter. Being inspired by Chico. Right, John?
Yes, no doubt. Okay, so my favorite segment, I don't know as many as I'd like, but this one has always struck me. And that was his time. He was late for work and he's at the train station. And the train's coming up and this little child comes up to him and the child is just overwhelmed. It's Chico. My goodness, I've got to get his autograph and got to talk to him. And Chico notices the child and he says to Emmanuel, what should I do? And Emmanuel says, well, it's up to you, but it might be better if you spent the time. And Chico is still torn, but he decides, okay, I'm gonna talk to the child. And he takes the time to talk to him, writes an autograph for him, and the child just lights up. I mean, he's just ecstatic about what happened. And he walks away, and after he walks away, Emmanuel says to Chico that he was so happy that he allowed that child the time that he did. And of course, that short amount of time that he took, and even though he was a little bit late for work, what Emmanuel stressed to him was how much that meant for him to extend his life, because it energized him for, I can't remember how many years it was, but it was X number of years that he added on to his life. And this is the theme that's over and over again in this man's life. And it's emphasized also the small little things. And Peter, you were kind of hitting on these little things. When you do those little things, they are enormous. We don't give and maybe we shouldn't, but they're so insignificant. They seem insignificant to us, but they're not. And we have the spirits and God and Christ smiling at us. That's it.
Yeah, there is much for us. People don't know that at some point he was nominated. Some people, like a senator in Brazil, Freitas Nobre, brought the whole dossier to recommend him for the Nobel Peace Prize. He didn't get it. None of the people, not even the Pope at the time, got it. And he thought it wouldn't make any sense for him to get it. But the impact of Chico Xavier in the lives of people in Brazil alone to date grows as we speak. And it's amazing because he passed away in 2002, and yet every day, more and more people around the world get to know of him in ways that are really astounding. To know a little more about the humanitarian Chico, we want to show a few pictures that were given from Chico Xavier to Haddad, the family, who used to be in North Carolina and brought Chico to the US twice, 1965 and 66. And these are the pictures that we want to show to you. Hold on a second. It's just escaping here where it is. Okay. There you go. Just a few pictures for us. You can see it, right? And this picture is the line of people. Look at the kilometers of people who would wait in line to see Chico Xavier. And this is just like unbelievable. He would give, of course, through him, many people gave goods, and through him, they were distributed to many people who were in need. This is actually the family, the Haddad family, and Phyllis, the wife, and the 3 children, including Edwina, the one who gave us the pictures. And these are the pictures of the people waiting in line to see him, to receive the goods from him, to receive books, even the children, the food. And usually the Spiritist Center was so small. And this is so important to us because think about it. How many people in the world become mediums, become very spiritual, and they tend to be in a temple, encapsulated in their temple? Chico Xavier did the reverse. The more he received from the good spirits, the more people he would see and give of himself. He would start a meeting, and if you go to the Spiritist magazine, in last year's issue, if I'm not, I'm the editor-in-chief and I forgot the number of the issue, but I'll tell you later, the precise number. There is a recent issue, I think it's probably the latest or last year's, where Geraldo Lemos Neto talks about what it is to experience one weekend with Chico Xavier, from Friday to Sunday. It's unbelievable. Describing the hours and how he would dedicate himself to people and at the same time be a phenomenal medium, bringing all these books that after his passing still impact our lives. But talking about the humanitarian aspect of his life, Nora, what would you like to share as a main highlight?
Oh, on top of being a humanitarian with us humans, a huge highlight of Chico was his love for nature, being humanitarian with nature. He actually, there's a book that he wrote. It's still in Portuguese, but we can translate it. Maybe it's like the little tiny book of nature through the spirit, Casimiro Cunha. And it's a lot of excerpts of just about nature. It's very poetic at first glance, but in actuality, Chico and Spirit Cunha, they're very smart in just bringing that awareness to us, that spiritual awareness of environmental science, right? So a lot of the topics that ranged here are current events here in the US, things that we're like worried about, like global warming, animal rights, like equal, like famine. We still have, like being a teacher too, there's a lot of children to be surprised they don't have food to eat unless the school gives them. But so the topics here are like, he talks about the sun, the moon, sustainable living, like farming, organic agriculture practices. He even talks about pesticides in the soil, pollution, recycling, even about, he talks this really interesting little excerpt. He talks about maintaining our car, and we think we're dealing with car exhaust right at this moment. We saw the differences with the pandemic. I'm like, this is incredible. He shared the little biology of flowers, trees, plants, mountains, rocks, the care for oceans, flood, waters, ponds, the beaches. He even talked about the weather, the wind, the rain, the clouds, the floods, the fires. They talked about the preservation of the seed. There's a couple of texts of how do we take care of that seed. Seed is, it's food for us, it's sustenance, right? This is environmental science, the balance of nutrition, having it on the table versus people not having it. How are we grateful? But most importantly, his care for animals, which we know was so much of Chico's part, his humanitarian side. In another book, it's not translated, but just a translation here is called Chico, the Barefoot Medium, I guess, by Carlos Bacelli. There's a chapter in there that he wrote a letter to Carlos saying that his precious cat, Boneca, had passed away, and that he had cried and cried, and he was grieving, and he didn't know how to deal with it, because he said that this was not just an animal. He was a being, right, that also had this special care and mentors. And so humble she could even ask the friends, could you please pray for me while I'm going through this difficulty? So we see the beauty. I'm gonna read a couple of excerpts from that book, and hopefully this book is translated, because it is really a poetic environmental science book. He talks about the animals, right, and how to take care of them. It says, in the house of nature, the Father spread with art the blessing of life's light that shine everywhere. These generous blessings, so rich, so natural, are notes of divine love in the spheres of animals. And then he goes, seek to see in all the animals our little brothers. God is the father of wise men, but also of animals. And then to finalize, it says, the animals are of your house also have ties to your lives. The law is eternal, of fraternal duties. Angels take care of men, and humanity takes care of animals. So what a beautiful side of Chico for us to love our environment and our animals. Yeah, it was beautiful.
Thank you, Nora. What about you, Peter?
Okay. Sorry about that. I think what is impressive about him is the way he maintained his humility. And there are lots of ways of understanding that, but just to elaborate a little bit on what you were talking about before, Vanessa, about the line of people that would come to see him. I think it was Geraldo Lemos Neto who'd mentioned that he might start signing books at, say, 5 p.m, and it might go until 7 a.m. the next day. So it'd be like 14 hours straight. And the fact that he was willing to take that kind of time for everyone, that he gave a little bit of himself to everyone and would stay until everybody had had their chance to receive what they wanted, a signed book in this case. I think that in itself is impressive. I know one person who became well known, and she used to comment about how much it hurt her hand to sign so many books and things like that. And but the other thing in general along those lines is that when people were calling him medium of the century and things like that, it's very difficult for that not to go to someone's head. And the fact that it didn't, I think it says a great deal about him. And the comment you were making before, Vanessa, about him being nominated for the Nobel Prize and him kind of dismissing it and feeling a little embarrassed by it. He was really committed to doing the work and the generosity of the work. And there are many stories of how Emmanuel kept coming to him saying, okay, you've done this many books now, let's do another 60, and that kind of thing. And then he would say, okay, and he would just keep going. In this day and age, especially, where people put so much emphasis on fame and notoriety and all of that, even when he was well known and people practically worshiped him. Not that they should have, but even if they did, he really didn't take that seriously. He was emphasizing that he was working on behalf of God. And that is a level of if we really see things as we're working on behalf of God and that's it, then it expands humanity and expands our capacity for humanity. And of course, it's very commendable that he could do that, because I think that's a challenge for many of us at times.
Truly moving. What about you, John?
Yes. Well, this book, Medium of the Century by Guy Playfair, I happened to open up to this little section, and I think it kind of plays into what we're talking about. It was at the end of this particular section that let's see, yeah, which was Medium of the Century. No, it wasn't. No, medium is the message. And at the end, it says, one of the most generous tributes to Chico yet published came from a man from a very different background. He was a doctor and a playwright. His name was Pedro Bloch, and he was a Jewish immigrant from, of all places, Ukraine, who is a member of one of Brazil's leading magazine publishing families. And he was commenting on the suggestion that some insisted that Chico was an imposter. Dr. Bloch wrote in 1952, "What a divine imposter he must be to live the life he does of humility and abnegation, to renounce that surprising work whose authorship he denies, and to keep himself isolated in a little interior town when fame and fortune would welcome him with open arms. To find the way to salvation, humanity needs a few million more Chico Javier's, even if they do not write a single message, for Chico Javier himself is already a message."
What a life to be studied. And when we talk about him, of course, it all began, though Nora mentioned about his mediumistic abilities when he was a child, but it became to life. He became a spiritist, and that's the pathway through which he unfolded everything. Through the teachings of Spiritism, he was allowed free to be what he needed to be. And that's the beauty of Spiritism. So liberating and so grounding to us. As a spiritist and a medium, we're going to talk about his books next, but right now, for us who are spiritists, who are also committed to joining forces with this movement around the world, his presence is so impacting our lives. I know some people tell me, but I'm not Chico Xavier. Okay, we're not here disputing who is Chico Xavier, who is not, but certainly his attitude before, the way he embraced Spiritism, the way he blessed his Catholic upbringing, the way he interacted with people of all sorts of backgrounds, religious, non-religious, is something to be emulated. So in terms of being a spiritist, Nora, what in Chico Xavier's life brought to your eyes something particularly fascinating?
Well, you know, finding information on him as a medium, being American, for us, Chico is not something that we are born with. He's not common. So our instinct is to find anything in English. Like, is there something about him? And there was actually something, I know we were mentioning this book. I'm just doing a translation here, The Lives of Chico by Marcel Sotomayor. But it was really to tell a story where there was this very famous Brazilian journalist that wanted to debunk Chico Xavier's mediumship, right? And so he goes and, you know, Chico Xavier psychographs and comes up probably what would be like gibberish for the Brazilian Portuguese. And they were like, is this Arabic or what is it? It turns out it was English. Like they had to, like, you just put it like it was backwards English. I guess they put like a mirror or something and it came out. And the message was so beautiful. It said, my dear spiritualist friends, men's learning is nothing over against of the death. Let you support your cross with patience and courage. The pain and faith are the greater earthly treasure, and the work is the gold of the life. But for all of you believing either not, here is our great message. God is our Father. We are brothers. Let us love one another. Emmanuel. So this message comes out from Chico, who is not American, has no knowledge of English, and the journalist's first words are like, you see, you're not a medium. The grammar is wrong. And I was like, okay. So then the story ends where Chico humbly says, oh, I'm still learning English in the spiritual realm, right? So I take a deep breath, because as someone who, if I were to hear a medium who is not from my country leave a message in another language, I would be like, what? But you know, the thing is, like, it's interesting. This is a part where I'm going might go a little bit longer, but because I took a little bit of linguistics, I've taken grammar, and also the history of the English language. And in these 3 classes, we learn one thing. The same professor taught all the classes. In the grammar, he said, you're gonna have 2 choices. When you're teaching grammar to your students, you can either be like the very strict grammarian, or you could be a little bit more flexible, right? And he goes, and think about the English language. We have the Old English, like the Germanic, the Beowulf time. Then we have the Middle English, that's the Shakespearean English, right? That's like theater English, we don't even use that. And now we have the current, which is the Latin and the French, and now it's so diverse. And he says, put yourself in that picture when you're looking at a piece of a student turns in a paper. And now think about it from a linguistic perspective. And I know Noam Chomsky has done lots of research of how we acquire language. We have to have certain phonemes. Yes, I know Dr. Anceloni, as a neuroscience, we know there's a lot of neuroplasticity, but there also has to be, in the language part, we need like a blueprint of certain phonemes, of certain things for us to make a language, you know? So we like, for instance, when I learned a little bit of Portuguese, I actually used like English and Spanish to help me learn some of the stuff. And it was over time. And I say this because now we go back to Chico's mediumship. There he is with none of this information, and he's saying such a beautiful message. And yet some people just focus on the grammar. There was another message too, but it is so important for us, because really think about it. His mediumship, it's not about beginning, middle, and end. It's not about what happened in the past, the present, or the future. We're missing the point. Tuning into Chico's messages is really about the vibration of love, of faith, of courage. For some people, closure, of progress, of, you know, transition, of just all these beautiful things. And it makes a huge difference when we come from that perspective to understand it versus, oh, well, we should have put a semicolon and not a period. I thought that was very interesting. Yeah.
Wonderful point. Wonderful point. Peter, what came to you?
Okay. There was an interesting moment where somebody once went to Chico and asked him, you know, Chico, what's going to happen to Spiritism if you stop working? And that's an interesting question, because the implication of that question is somehow it's all on his shoulders, that somehow he's transforming Spiritism and it will end as soon as he stops. But Chico's answer was interesting, and it certainly says a lot about him as a person. I'll read it to you. It basically goes like this. He said, my son, mediums are like grass. The more you pull them out of the soil, the more they grow. So he's implying that, first of all, he does not have a monopoly on mediumship. As talented as he was as a medium, yes, he was an exceptional medium, but one does not have to be like Chico Xavier. in order to make a contribution. And he's touching on another point that is certainly commented on and touched on in the Medium's book, the second book in the Spiritist codification, that in theory at least, all of us have some capacity for mediumship. But putting that point aside for a moment, CHICO was certainly optimistic in emphasizing that many will continue whatever work needs to be done, and that this was just the beginning. And of course, there were mediums before CHICO, during his time, and certainly after him as well. And so it was interesting to see how he was part of a bigger plan, and he knew that. I think he knew very clearly that there was a larger plan afoot in which he would be helping to usher in work that other mediums would be able to participate in as well.
Thank you, Peter. John.
Yes. Okay, CHICO as a medium. In same book, this CHICO Medium of the Century, he's got in here about Janet Duncan, the English lady that translated many of his books for him. And it's fascinating how he, she was in Brazil for quite a while. And in here in the book, he talks about how she was studying about Spiritism and Allan Kardec and so forth. And she got a nudge from her spirit guide, as she says, to go to Uberaba, where he was at that particular time. This is back in, like I say, 1971. Of course, that was a long bus ride from Sao Paulo. It was almost 11 hours at that time. So she put it off, and then she got it nudged again. And he said, the spirit told her, all right, this is the bus you take, and this is the day you're supposed to take it. And as the story proceeds, she gets on the bus. There wasn't hardly anybody there, but this one lady came over and sat next to her, and she was telling her, I'm going to see CHICO. And she had heard about her, but she didn't know where in Uberaba that he was. So they happened to stop, made a stop, and this couple get on. And the couple, they find out, also is going to see CHICO, and guess what? They know where he is in Uberaba. And after she gets there, she meets up with CHICO, and CHICO asks her, well, what's your name? And she tells him her name. My name is Janet Duncan. And the story says he looked very puzzled, and he asked her again, what is your name? And she repeats Janet Duncan. And he says, well, wait a second, I'm going to write your name down. And he writes the name down in the book. And then she shows it to him. And she is like flabbergasted, because her name on the book that he wrote down was Ginny Ann Annetta Duncan. And she, of course, had shortened it to Janet Duncan, because the Brazilian people are having trouble pronouncing her name. So, here he is showing his mediumship in such a humble way to this lady. And the Janet's lasting impression of him, he was somebody who not only had a mission, which he fulfilled well and truly, but here was a man close to Jesus. And she went on, she made the trip to Uberaba a number of times. And of course, I think her first book was The Gospel According to Spiritism, was the first one that she translated for him. So there's another one in here about Elsa, but I don't want to take up the time. But Elsa Rossi, how she got hooked up with CHICO, is a wonderful story. But what again happens, and you see how if Janet hadn't gone through that, she would have never made the connection. Just like with Elsa, and Elsa finally made the connection with Janet and started the British Spirit Union up in England. So it's, anyway, the fascination continues.
Yes, you're right. And the one, besides him being the person who he was, the humanitarian and the modeling spiritist, one of the most striking things through his ability of psychography is that when he was only 21 years of age, he got his book published. And this book is named in Portuguese, Parnaso de Além Túmulo, Parnassus Beyond the Tomb, which had 259 poems of deceased Brazilian and Portuguese illustrious poets. It shook up Brazil so much back then that people couldn't believe that somebody who only had the 4th grade education in elementary school were able to write a book like that. But he said, I didn't write it, the spirits wrote through me. Of course, it was like a lot of chaos, but the poems don't come to us as simple poems to entertain us, but they come to teach us, to educate us, to console us, to inspire us. Every single book that was written through his hand, more than 400 books. There's still people counting how many, because today they're finding out more things that he wrote. They're putting it together in books and more books. For us, it took a lot of discipline on his side. Discipline, as Emmanuel, his mentor, said, and his good heart to really think of everybody who, like us, would be here, far away from Brazil, and would open these books and change our lives. Think differently, feel differently, make decisions in a different way. For me personally, the book that really changed my way of feeling life is The Good News, written by the spirit author Humberto de Campos through Chico Xavier. Never forget, when I read that book, I always felt Jesus, but not in that way. It's a book that talks about Jesus in ways unforeseen. It's almost like a movie when you read the book. The book is not published yet, though fully translated, and you can read all of its chapters in the Espírita magazine, in each and every issue since 2012. It took us 10 years to publish the whole book, quote unquote. The Brazilian Spiritist Federation, we did it because we had to share the chapters with the public in some way and form, though unofficial, but to share with you at Carta Creative, the Spiritist magazine, a book that brings to us this closeness, as John de Rosa was saying in the description of Guillaume Playfair and Janet Duncan's very words. Jesus, being close to him, makes us feel close to Jesus. When you read those books, any of those books, it makes us feel transported to another dimension. Nora, of all his books, which one touched you the most and why?
Oh my Lord, that was hard. I think the Andre Luis series in general, those are really good books. They have a lot of the science and the spirituality in there. I know I've heard first time people say, oh, it's science fiction. But let us remember too that what science today at once, they would say science fiction. So there's so much in that series, in all the books, that I'm just thinking like, my gosh, I mean, how can we show this to the youth? Because they could get so many ideas, so many scientific discoveries about a lot of things that we can't even imagine. But I have a short story of you, allow me to share. It's actually on the first book, Astro City. I was in Brazil. I was 19, the first time going to Brazil. I didn't know Portuguese, much less Spiritism. And a friend hands me Astro City, writing Portuguese, and says, you're going to have to read it. I said, I don't know how to read this. We'll figure it out. Oh my gosh, a dictionary. Yeah. Asking the mentors, they're using the Spanish, whatever. I stayed in Brazil, I think it was for almost a whole month. So that whole month, that was the thing. Could I figure out how to read this book? I understood it very broken in pieces here and there. It was about 2 days before coming back to the US that we were walking downtown Curitiba, and there was this sign, and it said they had a play of Astral City. I said, oh my gosh, a play. My friend's like, we need to go in there. We went. It was jam-packed, guys. I'm talking like it was, but there was a seat in the front and there was a seat in the back. My friend's like, you go right there. That's a seat that the spirits have right for you. The front row. I could not believe it. I have to tell you, I kind of freaked out because it's my first time being in a spirit, into spiritism. I'm 19. So I like sat there and literally the book, what I tried to do, all this stuff, like, oh, that's what it meant. Oh my gosh. So I saw the play after reading the book. I came back super scared, like, wow. But see, that's the thing about Chico's book. If we really were to pay attention, we are always being like mentored and taught by the spirit mentors. And Andre's series, it's very special. And I thank God they're in English now. Now they're all in English. I'm like, yes, because it was very hard not being to understand them.
You're right. They are all in English now, and they are fascinating. Thank you. Thank you, Nora. For you, Peter, which book or books impacted you the most?
Oh, that is a difficult question. Certainly, I'm very fond of the inspirational books from Emmanuel, Our Daily Bread, The Way, the Truth, and the Life, and Living Spring, and so forth. They're great, but one can like those books for different reasons, because if you want something short, an inspirational message of some kind. But I, too, am very fond of the Andre Louis series. In general, they're great introduction to the way in which the spirit world functions, at least based upon what we've been told. And so it takes a lot of the content of the Spiritist codification from Kardec and grounds it into more specifics, a lot of specific instances, but then it also nicely elaborates. But the book among those that I wanted to focus on is actually the second book in the series, The Messengers. And I took some notes, and I'll share just a few things. Generally speaking, what I like about this book is that it introduces a lot of different concepts which are very important in Spiritism. That's one. But two, it's interesting to see some of the comments that were being made in this book that came out 80 years ago, easily 80 years ago, in the early 1940s. And the book also does one of the things that Spiritism does, which is Spiritism does point out to us that we always need to be mindful of why we're here. Because in the earlier part of that book, there are many commentaries about the number of spirits that come back and they did not fulfill their mission. They made all kinds of promises before they incarnated as to what they were going to do to work on their spiritual progress, and they forgot or they avoided it and things like that. But then there are other things that get talked about in this book. But along those lines, actually, there's a nice quote here. It says, "The one who works for a goal, always listening to the sure voice of higher wisdom, can expect the best." This is not a mere promise, it's the law. So I thought that was a nice one. And there's a moment in the book where a family's praying together. And the comment made was, "Christ taught us that the kingdom of heaven is within us. Consequently, it is in our hearts where we must make the biggest effort, without which we will remain immature, thoughtless individuals." So there's a nice, again, mindfulness about how Christ can work through us, and we need to go beyond ourselves. There's comments in there about the effects of prayer, that it repels lower level spirits and protects us at home. That's a basic concept in Spiritism, and this book certainly touches on that. Another example would be the way thought matters. That's a big theme in the Andre Louis books in general, how much thought matters. And it gives a specific example about thought forms. There's one moment in one of the chapters, chapter 40, that talks about cloud-like lumps floating over streets. The idea is that we create thoughts and we create these clouds. And it goes on to say, if the sick body produces millions of pathogenic microorganisms, so does the sick mind launch millions of mental forms into the environment. And that's just one of the things this book is talking about, the way in which thought makes a difference, how collectively each of us needs to take responsibility for what we think. I mean, we can't be perfect. Of course, we're going to have bad moments, but are we habitually engaging in negativity, for instance, things like that? A few others. This book also talks about ecology. Again, early 1940s, as Nora was commenting on. It talks about ecology and the need for sustainable development. And I think that was interesting because that's at least, I don't know, 25 years easily before this started to get talked about. And I may be wrong in saying this, but I believe the idea of sustainable development was more widely talked about probably in around the 1990s or so and going forward. So nowadays we think about this more and more, but to be talking about this in the early 1940s, I thought was interesting. So this book introduces a lot of things along those lines. It also reminds us about the need to be patient with the slow progress of humanity, which I know can be very frustrating. People look at the state of humanity and how, we look like the end is around the corner and things like that. But the book is saying, look, we have to really take the long-term view, which again is essential. One of the essential core points that Spiritism makes. There's the past, present, and future, and we need to look at it from a much broader perspective and not just the very here and now. Some other things is there's nice little moments like Andre helps a spirit near the end of the book in a medium-like session, and the spirit just thanks him and is, suddenly able to see things that it could not see before. And Andre gets very impressed by this, but he's reminded that he should not get overly impressed by what he's doing. That he was reminded, or was pointed out to him, that we forget the Supreme Being is the true source of goodness and that we are merely instruments. So again, it's a reminder that God is working through us. We're not the original cause if we help someone in this way. Again, it's an example of Andre helping a spirit that was stuck, what we call a suffering spirit, where a spirit is unable to get out of a predicament because it has the same thought patterns again and again and again. The skeptic, there's a moment in this book where a skeptic is addressed, someone who's very materialistic. Another thing is there's a discarnate woman, a spirit that's put to sleep, again, as a way of helping her. And the thing that I thought about when I first read this is a lot of spiritist centers, in terms of the work they do in mediumistic meetings, some of the approaches that are used in spiritist centers today are picked up in this book. And I must admit, I haven't researched this exhaustively, but I started to think, well, maybe some of the practices were inspired by books like The Messengers in some ways, in terms of what to do with suffering spirits and some of the approaches taken. So again, I like how this book introduces some of these ideas, several of them, and then many of them can be expanded on. I'll just mention one more. I don't want to keep going, but for example, near the end of the book, there's a person named Fernando who's dying, and he did not take very good care of his body. And Aniceto, who's a spirit guide, sort of a source of inspiration and wisdom in this book for Andre, and Vincent, who's his colleague. Aniceto paraphrases Paul of Tarsus, and then he says, quote, "Every incarnate individual has the spirit company he or she deserves." So again, it was a comment about how our behavior attracts the company that we have. So again, we have to, of course, be mindful about what kind of company are we attracting, and we need to be more conscious about these things. So again, I could spend more time on this, but this book introduces a lot of wonderful concepts in general that are very relevant to Spiritism.
Thank you, Peter. It's very inspirational to know that there's so much to learn in this book. So what about you, John?
Well, I've had this question before, and each one of Chico's books that he's psychographed have contribution after contribution. And Peter, you kind of went into how many contributions there are in those books. And the way I like to answer this question, the way we like to answer this question is, all right, what made the most impact on you? And I have to go back to 2000 years ago, made the most impact on me. And why did that make the most impact on me? And I go back to that situation where Publius Lentus, sent by Libya to go visit Christ to see if he could help Flavio with her chest congestion and so forth. And he meets up with Christ. And of course, Christ gives him the ultimate request, asking him, would you like to follow me? And of course, Publius Lentulus, in his pride, decides not to follow Christ, and is even skeptical about whether or not his daughter is healed. Of course, Christ told him, go, she is healed. And of course, when he gets home, he finds out she is healed. And of course, he throws it off by saying that it must have been the reason they originally moved down to Palestine area was because it had a much better climate. And that's probably what did it. And here's the lesson for us. He put himself in this vein as the Spirit Emmanuel now for millennia to make up for that situation. And we get opportunities all the time. And so we must be aware enough to take advantage of those opportunities so we don't put this off for another lifetime. Because as we all know in Spiritism, the opportunity is not one that comes up so often. We're going to spend a lot of time up there in heaven studying, helping before the next opportunity arises. So that's the reason that book made so much of an impact on me.
2,000 years ago. And those novels, because they're true accounts, but they are in the novel format and style, 2,000 years ago, 50 years later. And then Hail Christ, Renunciation, Paul and Stephen, certainly, as John is saying, remind us of the call every day for us. To wrap up this roundtable conversation, we have another aspect of Chico Xavier, and that's why we put this background here with us, because Chico represents to us this model of the human being of the future. When we think of the future on Earth, the ultimate frontier is not about Mars and Jupiter or anything. The ultimate frontier is within. And thinking about all the virtues that he displays and he cultivated, altruism is the ultimate one. Altruism, prioritizing the well-being of everyone and working upon it day and night, made Chico Xavier for us, the Christ-conscious being, showing to us and proving to us time and again that the model that the Christ brought to us is possible. It is possible. For those who say the bar is too high, it's a matter of effort and repetition. But Nora, what would you say in terms of him and being this model of human being in the future?
So I think this is on Amazon Prime. It's a documentary that it's called Data Limite, and it talks a little bit. It was a great example. There's a little bit of everything, how Chico takes the future of humanity in different ways. But what's different, what was really beautiful really was the advancements that we will have, especially in the science. There's just something about him talking about how spirituality and science will kind of blend in and start to make sense, right? Talking about a future with so much technology, the advancements in medicine, also think about how this will facilitate us to be living and cohabitating in more peaceful ways, to be more understanding, to things about hunger and all these things, equal opportunities for all would be something that, to me, when I saw that would be possible. We talked, I know there's a lot of talk of the world regeneration, right? But there is something super interesting, because I'm like, okay, what about us here in the US? And in one of his shows, it's the Pinga Fogo, which was this show. In the first interview, they actually asked him about different people, and one of them was John F. Kennedy. And he said something like, I paused when I heard that, and I went back. I was like, what did you just say? And he says, Kennedy continues to work on the spiritual realm in the progress of ideas of emancipation, integration of races, and the fraternity of American people. And I said, wow, that is unbelievable. So we could say that every country, every nation, we have our own help, our own boost, to not only help us in that science perspective, but to also be working on this morality, as you said, Vanessa, right? So I guess to wrap this up, a future in Chico's eye would be one of kindness, compassion, advanced science, but always service to others, because that's the only way we can get to those places, helping each other out. So anyway, it's beautiful.
Wonderful, wonderful. How about you, Peter?
I'd like to share with all of you the passage I came across from CHICO. It's called Not to Lose, and I think it's an interesting commentary about what to hang on to. And he basically put it this way: may God not permit me to lose my romanticism, though knowing that roses do not speak, that I do not lose my optimism, though knowing that the future that awaits us is not a happy one, that I do not lose my will to live, though knowing that life is in many moments painful, that I do not lose my interest in making good friends, though knowing that as the world turns, they wind up departing from our lives, that I do not lose the will to help people, though knowing that many of them are unable to see, to recognize, and to return this help, that I do not lose my equilibrium, knowing that countless forces desire my downfall, that I do not lose the will to love, though knowing that the person that I love best may not share the same feelings for me, that I do not lose the light and the brilliance of my eyes, though knowing that many things that I will see in the world will darken my vision, that I do not lose my enthusiasm, though knowing that defeat and loss are two extremely dangerous adversaries, that I do not lose my reasoning, though knowing that the temptations of life are countless and delightful, that I do not lose the sense of justice, though knowing that the one harmed could be me, that I do not lose the strength of my embrace, though aware that that one day my arms will be weak, that I do not lose the beauty and the happiness of sight, though knowing that a lot of tears will drop from my eyes and flow from my soul, that I do not lose the love of my family, though knowing that many times I would have demand incredible efforts on my part to maintain its harmony, that I do not lose the will of giving this tremendous love that exists in my heart, though knowing that often it will be subjected and even rejected, that I do not lose the will to be great, though knowing that the world is small, and above all, that I never forget that God loves me infinitely, that a small grain of happiness and hope within each one is capable of changing and transforming anything, because life is constructed in our dreams and is summed up in love. I thought of this because it's a call to be for us to be courageous and to try to maintain courage. And when we think about being a human of the future, well, all of this is stuff that we all need to work on as we move forward into the future.
Very inspiring. Thank you, Peter. What about you, John?
Okay.
The men of the future.
I think I wrote this a little bit when I was listening to Geraldo Lemos Neto, and then this book here. Chico demonstrated and taught us how to love one another, how to be more humble, patient, to respect differences, thereby respecting one another. How Chico lived his life was a small window into how our Master Jesus lived his life some 2,000 years ago. When one watches that YouTube that Nora mentioned, Pingo Fogo, the video, one can get an understanding of what he embodied. Now, the last comment is that this today, August 28th, is the anniversary of that famous speech, I Have a Dream, given by Dr. Come on now.
Martin Luther King Jr.
No, thank you. Martin Luther King Jr., yes. And that was 59 years ago, 1963. And are the spirits involved in this, picking out this date for that particular thing? I think so. Thank you, Chico.
Yes, we have a dream now to see more Chico Xavier's in the world. And talking about him, so inspiring what you said, John. I want to share one last screen with a few of Chico Xavier's inspiring sayings, statements. As we wrap up this conversation here about Chico's impact in our lives, I'd like to ask each one of us to pick one of these and share a little about how much of that saying really can be transformative to you. Nora,
Okay, start with the first one.
you can choose any of them.
Oh, I can choose any of them. Okay, all right. I want to choose the second one then. Let's start with the second one. It says, the soul that acquires the virtue of forgiveness won't find any more trouble. No matter what happens, he will know how to run his life. That beautiful word, forgiveness. It's like a formula to look young and to stay young. A lot of people are surprised to say the age, and they're like, what's the secret? And it's really to letting go. Let go of things. Don't hold on to them. We have a book here in the U.S. by I think Luis Miguel, the four agreements. The second agreement there says to not take anything personal, because if we do, that's like the biggest way of being so selfish, thinking that it's all about us. So when we forgive, it's a virtue, because in essence, we're stepping outside of who we are and just being like that Jesus conscious being. So it's a beautiful quote by Chico.
Beautiful. Thank you, Nora. What about you, Peter?
I'll respond to the first one. If I would expect better spiritual conditions to serve, I would not have started until the present moment. I have another passage. This one's kind of short, but it's a commentary from a magazine about him, in which he talks about the importance of work. And it says, a certain lady who was the president of a large charitable institution died, and the friend who was asked to replace her asked Chico whether he was prepared to assume that task or not. And here was the reply, quote, none of us is prepared to carry out the work of Christ. However, this should not be an excuse to avoid fulfilling the task or to remain in inertia, but rather to accept the work, offering Jesus the best that we can give. This because we are still not angels, but rather human beings in great need of work for Jesus, to whom we must offer the best that we have. So it's, a nice reminder that we don't have to be, quote, fully qualified in order to get started. And part of the goal is to learn as we go along.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter. What about you, John?
Well, naturally, I'm going to take the last one. Though nobody can go back and make a new beginning, anyone can start over and make a new ending. I think it kind of speaks for itself, but each day we arise to a new beginning. and we can certainly make a much better ending each day. It's just a matter of, as you said earlier, Vanessa, effort and repetition is the only way. And as Kardec mentioned, without charity, there is no salvation. And effort and repetition is what gives us that charity and that salvation.
And friends, as Chico Xavier used to say, Jesus Christ did not ask us much from us. He did not demand that people climb Mount Everest or make great sacrifice. He just asked that we love one another. Seems simple, but when he says love one another, he includes the enemies, adversaries, the criminals. And Chico Xavier, in a beautiful passage, when he was visiting the largest penitentiary in São Paulo, in Brazil in general, Carandiru, which I happened to visit myself when we were with the graduate school. He, at the end of the visit, he wanted to embrace, to give a hug, and kiss the hands of every single prisoner. And the director said, no, you can't. I would have to have my men pointing the guns, preparing to shoot, because they might. And he said, no, they won't. And he was able to hug everyone, the most dangerous ones, without any problem. Chico Xavier certainly emulates Jesus and brings to us. It's the dream that John said that comes true. The Jesus dream. When he said, follow me, Chico Xavier not only followed him, but proves to us that it's possible for us to walk the same path as long as we're willing to love. And right now we are going to thank each one of you. Thank you, dear Nora. Thank you, dear Peter. Thank you, dear John, for your time, for the wisdom in your words, for sharing your love as well with all of us, making us feel how privileged we are in knowing of this divine man on earth, Chico Xavier, that is stimulating us, encouraging us to be divine as well. We want to thank everyone who is watching, and we hope you got inspired too. If you have any question, if you want to talk to any of us, write to kardecradio@gmail.com, and we'll forward your message to any and everyone here so we can be in touch. Thank you very much.